Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun one.
This time we're looking at the potential economic and financial impacts
Oh, yeah.
of a second Donald Trump presidency.
Second term.
So buckle up because we're diving into some expert analysis
So deep.
to see how his proposed policies could shake things up across different sectors.
What's really interesting here is that we have this chance to kind of peek into the future
Yeah.
and get a sense of what a Trump presidency could mean.
Right.
Not just for like the overall economy,
Right.
but for like, your investments, your job,
Yeah.
even just your daily life.
Absolutely. And the potential outcomes are pretty surprising, honestly.
Oh, for sure.
Both on the upside and the downside.
Yeah, definitely both sides.
So let's jump right in.
Let's do it.
One of the big things that we're seeing is his emphasis on American manufacturing.
Yeah.
That Made in America push.
Yeah, made in America.
So let's unpack that a little bit. We've got these proposals to bring manufacturing jobs back to the U.S.
Right.
Boost industries like steel, automotive, electronics.
Uh-huh.
On the surface, it sounds, pretty promising.
It does.
More jobs, potentially higher wages if the labor market tightens.
Yeah, if companies are forced to produce more here in the U.S., though,
Yeah.
where labor and materials are more expensive,
Wow.
those costs are very likely going to be passed down to us.
Right, the consumer.
businesses. Yeah,
So we could see higher prices for a lot of the goods that we're used to getting,
absolutely.
maybe at a lower price.
Yeah, think about things like cars, appliances, even clothing.
Wow.
And that new phone that you've been saving up for,
Right.
that could suddenly be out of reach.
Yeah, it's a scary thought.
And this is where, we start to see the potential for trade wars.
Oh, yeah.
If other countries retaliate
Right.
against these protectionist policies
Oh.
with their own tariffs, it's just a back and forth,
A vicious cycle.
vicious cycle. Yeah, and nobody really wins.
So some industries might struggle under these conditions,
Sure.
but others could really see a boom.
Absolutely. Like, we're talking potential benefits for small businesses
Okay.
and large corporations.
Mm-hmm.
If those tax cuts that Trump's proposing actually go through,
Yep.
lower taxes usually mean higher profits,
Right.
which companies can then reinvest
Okay.
to grow and expand their business.
Well, so like that local coffee shop that everybody loves
Exactly.
could finally have the money to open that second location that
Okay.
they've been wanting.
Yep. But there's another side to all of this as well.
Okay.
There are industries, particularly those that rely on immigrant labor,
Yeah.
that could be facing some serious challenges. Agriculture, construction,
Uh-huh.
they could be looking at some significant labor shortages.
So it's almost like we could end up in this weird situation
Yeah.
where we're trying to boost domestic manufacturing,
Right.
but we don't have enough workers
To get it done.
to build the factories,
Yeah.
staff the production lines,
Mm-hmm.
harvest the crops.
It's like a tangled web
It is complex.
of all these different interconnected factors,
Oh.
and it just highlights how there could be unintended consequences.
Yeah.
We might see job losses in one area
Right.
while completely new jobs pop up somewhere else.
And that's just the domestic side of things.
Right.
Let's zoom out and look at the global impact.
The big picture.
Because Trump's America First approach
Mm-hmm.
could really shake up those existing global trade and supply chains
Absolutely.
that we've all gotten used to.
Yeah, and it's important to remember
Yeah.
that there could be some benefits to this.
Okay.
Bringing manufacturing back to the U.S.
Uh-huh.
could actually strengthen our infrastructure,
Right.
create more resilient supply chains,
Okay.
and maybe even reduce our reliance on other countries.
But there's also the risk that we disrupt these international partnerships
Absolutely.
that have been built up over decades.
And that leads us right back to those trade wars. That could have this ripple effect across the entire world.
Global economy.
Yeah, sectors like agriculture and technology,
Yeah.
they're heavily reliant on exports.
Right.
And if those markets shrink
Yeah.
or become more expensive to access,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to hurt American businesses.
Right.
It could lead to job losses.
And all of these potential shifts in global trade dynamics
Yeah.
could have some really interesting consequences for financial markets
Absolutely.
and investments.
Yeah. Remember how the stock market initially reacted
Yeah.
when Trump was first elected?
Yeah.
There was this surge of optimism
Uh-huh.
driven by those promises of tax cuts and deregulation.
Yeah, it seemed like the markets were pretty happy.
They were, but as trade and fiscal policies evolve,
Uh-huh.
you can almost guarantee that we're going to see increased volatility.
Right.
And different sectors are going to be impacted
Okay.
in ways that we can't even predict right now.
So investors need to be paying attention
Yeah.
and be ready to kind of shift their strategies.
Exactly. And there's another factor to consider here,
Okay.
the potential for a strong dollar.
So break that down for me.
So if the dollar gains value
Okay.
compared to other currencies,
Uh-huh.
it can impact your investments in a couple of ways.
Okay.
If you have international exposure
Yeah.
in your portfolio, those investments are suddenly worth less
Oh.
when you convert them back to dollars.
Gotcha.
A strong dollar can also make it really difficult for emerging markets
Yeah.
to repay any debt that they have
Right.
that's in U.S. dollars,
Okay.
which could create some instability in those regions.
So it's not just about picking the right stocks.
Right.
It's also about understanding this broader currency landscape.
Exactly. And this is where things get really interesting,
Okay.
because this is where you start to see those alternative investments
Yeah.
like cryptocurrencies and gold.
Yeah. This is where I get excited.
I figured you might.
Tell me more about these alternative investments.
So a lot of people view these assets as hedges against inflation,
Okay.
which could become a real issue
Uh,
if Trump's policies lead to higher debt and, some unconventional economic measures.
so some investors are looking at things like Bitcoin or gold
Uh-huh.
as a way to protect their wealth.
Exactly.
If the value of the dollar starts to go down.
That's the idea. Bitcoin is often viewed as like digital gold,
Okay.
a safe haven in times of economic uncertainty.
Okay.
And gold itself has a long history
Yeah.
of holding its value when things get unstable.
So we've got a lot to consider here,
We do.
both positive and negative.
Yeah,
It's a complex landscape.
it is.
It could be volatile.
Absolutely.
So we've got to be prepared.
Definitely.
We've got to be informed
We'll be back for part 2.
to dive deeper
Yeah,
into some of these topics.
that's going to be good.
So stick with us.
Welcome back to our deep dive exploring the possible economic landscape of a second Trump term.
We've been unpacking a lot already.
Yeah, trade manufacturing those alternative investments like Bitcoin.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But let's turn our attention to energy now.
Okay.
How might Trump's policies impact energy?
This is an area ripe for some big changes.
Yeah.
Trump's been pretty clear about his support for traditional energy sources,
Coal, oil, and gas.
Exactly. He's often talked about revitalizing that coal industry and reducing our dependence on foreign oil.
So less reliance on those imports.
Right. And his push for deregulation in the energy sector could mean some short-term wins for those industries.
Okay.
We might see a surge in production, maybe even lower energy prices initially.
So that'd be good news for consumers.
Potentially, but we got to think long-term too.
Okay.
This focus on fossil fuels could put us at odds with the global movement toward combating climate change.
Right. The world is shifting towards renewables.
Exactly. And if we're still heavily invested in fossil fuels, we risk falling behind.
In terms of
Innovation investment in that sector.
So we could miss out on those economic benefits and job creation that come with the transition to cleaner energy.
Right. And let's not forget the environmental cost of sticking with fossil fuels when we know we need to address climate change.
Yeah, it's a complex issue with some potentially significant consequences.
Definitely. And that brings us to another complex issue with potentially huge consequences.
National debt,
It's a big one.
already at record levels.
And Trump's proposed policies, those tax cuts, coupled with increased spending, could add trillions more.
Trillions.
Yeah, so break it down for me.
Okay.
What does this skyrocketing national debt actually mean for everyday people?
For their wallets.
One of the biggest impacts is the potential for higher interest rates.
Okay.
As the government borrows more to cover its spending, the demand for loans goes up, which drives up the cost of borrowing for everyone.
So that means higher interest rates on mortgages, car loans, credit cards.
Everything gets pricier.
Wow.
This could ripple across the whole economy. Higher borrowing costs could stifle business expansion and job creation.
Okay.
It could also reduce consumer spending because people have less disposable income.
So if businesses aren't growing and people aren't spending.
You could see an economic slowdown.
Right. And this is where the Federal Reserve comes in.
They might feel pressure to raise interest rates even further.
To control inflation.
Exactly. Which can get worse with increased government spending and that growing national debt.
So they're walking a tightrope.
Trying to balance keeping inflation under control without totally stifling economic growth.
Right.
It's a tough spot to be in.
So a lot of potential downsides. But are there any potential upsides to a second Trump term? economically speaking.
There are. We've talked about the possibility of a boost in manufacturing and energy production in the short term.
Right.
And his push for deregulation could lead to more business investment and job creation, at least in some sectors.
So there are two sides to the coin.
Always, we need to understand both the potential risks and the potential benefits.
Right. And that means looking beyond the headlines.
Exactly. We need to dig into the data and understand the potential consequences of these policies,
It's all about being prepared.
regardless of what the future holds.
So let's shift gears now and talk about how all of this might impact personal finance and investment strategies.
It's one thing to know the potential issues,
Right.
but it's another thing entirely to know what to do about it.
Exactly. That's what I'm curious about.
Let's get practical with some strategies for your investments and your overall financial health.
That sounds like a great way to wrap up part 2.
When we come back for the final part of our deep dive
We'll explore some steps you can take.
to navigate this potentially turbulent economic landscape.
All right, so welcome back to our final part here
Final part.
of our deep dive into the potential economic what-ifs
Right.
of a second Trump presidency.
Yeah,
We've covered a lot,
we have.
from those trade wars
Mm-hmm.
to energy policy
Uh-huh.
to that massive national debt.
The elephant in the room.
But now let's get down to brass tacks.
Yeah, let's talk strategy.
What can we actually do with this information?
Right. It's one thing to understand the potential issues,
Right.
but it's another thing entirely to know how to actually prepare for them.
Okay, because honestly, after the last 2 parts of this deep dive,
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling like I need a financial survival guide,
Well, consider this your guide.
right?
The first rule of survival in a potentially volatile economic environment
Yeah.
is diversification.
Diversification.
Remember how we talked about different sectors
Uh-huh.
being impacted in ways that we can't even predict?
Right.
So don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Right. Spread it around.
Exactly.
Right.
You want to have investments in different areas
Okay.
so that if one sector takes a hit,
Uh-huh.
you've got something else to potentially offset those losses.
So like different asset classes.
Exactly. Stocks, bonds, real estate, even commodities.
So within those asset classes, are there specific areas that seem promising?
Well, we talked about that potential short-term boost in domestic manufacturing. So companies in those supply chains could be a good bet.
Okay.
But keep in mind, those gains could be offset by rising costs and trade tensions.
So maybe balance it out
Right.
with investments in sectors less vulnerable to trade wars,
That's a good strategy.
things like healthcare,
Uh-huh.
or technology focused on the domestic market.
Exactly. And don't forget about those safe havens.
Oh yeah, like gold,
Gold.
certain cryptocurrencies.
They can provide a buffer if things get shaky.
Yeah,
They're not without risk, of course,
sure.
but they tend to do well when there's a lot of uncertainty.
Okay, so diversification is key.
Absolutely.
But what about beyond investments?
Uh-huh.
What can we do to protect our everyday finances?
Well, we talked about the possibility of higher inflation.
Right.
So having a solid emergency fund becomes even more critical.
So that rainy day fund is extra important.
You want that cushion if prices go up significantly.
Okay.
Or if there's some unexpected economic turbulence.
Makes sense. What else?
Yep. If you've got any high interest debt, like credit cards or personal loans,
Uh-huh.
now's the time to prioritize paying that down.
Okay.
If interest rates rise, like we talked about,
Yeah.
that debt can become a real burden.
So build up savings, pay down debt.
Get your financial house in order.
Yeah. Make sure you're ready for anything.
Exactly. And it's not just about reacting to potential negatives.
Okay.
It's also about being ready to capitalize on potential opportunities.
So what do you mean by that?
Well, we talked about job creation in certain sectors.
Right.
This could be a great time to invest in your skill set,
Okay.
learn new things that could make you more marketable.
So even if your industry is disrupted,
Right.
you've got the flexibility to adapt.
You're not stuck.
Okay.
And this applies to entrepreneurs, too.
Oh, great.
Times of economic change can create opportunities for innovation,
Okay.
for starting new businesses.
So if you've been thinking about taking the leap,
Yeah,
this might be the time.
they could be.
So it's about being proactive.
Absolutely.
Seeing change not as a threat, but as a chance to grow.
Exactly. And that brings us to a really important point.
Okay.
Your choices matter.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about the potential impact of policies,
Right.
but you still have control over your own decision.
You have an agency.
Exactly. You can make informed choices about how you invest,
Uh-huh.
how you manage your money, and how you prepare for the future.
So it's not just about getting swept along with the tide.
Right.
It's about learning how to navigate.
I like that analogy a lot.
Yeah.
Stay informed, Be adaptable and make choices that align with your values and goals.
So this deep dive has been amazing.
It
We
has.
went from feeling a bit lost at sea
Yeah,
to having a compass and a map to chart our course.
that's what we aim for.
That's what we're all about here at the Deep Dive,
Absolutely.
giving you the knowledge and insights you need to make informed decisions.
We'll be back next time.
Thanks for joining us, and until then,
Stay curious.
stay curious.